The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Every species that discovered faster than light travel soon learned the truth about the galaxy. It was not a place of exploration and wonder. It was an empire, and the Council was its master. High Chancellor Vetheran sat on his throne made of crystal from 100 conquered worlds. His scales shimmered with colors that showed his mood to those who knew how to read them. Right now, they showed satisfaction. His assistant had just informed him that another primitive species had joined the stars. They call themselves humans, the assistant reported. They come from a small blue world called Earth. Our scouts say they achieved interstellar travel 7 of their years ago. Vetheran made a sound that passed for laughter among his kind. Another species to add to our collection? Send the welcome fleet. Show them their place in the universe. 3 massive warships dropped out of hyperspace near Earth's moon 1 week later. Each ship was 12 kilometers long, covered with weapons that could destroy cities in seconds. This was how the Council greeted new species. With a show of force so overwhelming that resistance seemed impossible, Admiral Katie Morrison stood on the bridge of humanity's largest ship, the carrier Lincoln. She was 53 years old with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen 2 wars. Nothing in her experience had prepared her for alien contact. "They are sending us a message," said Lieutenant Danny Ortega from his station. "Let me hear it." The main screen flickered and showed a face that was clearly not human. Reptilian features, cold eyes, and a mouth full of small, sharp teeth. When it spoke, the words were in heavily accented English. "Primitive humans. I am Emissary Grath of the Galactic Council. Your species has been found worthy of recognition. You will send representatives to our station within 30 of your days. There you will learn about your obligations to the Council. You will learn what tribute you must pay for the privilege of existing under our protection." The screen went dark before anyone could respond. Admiral Morrison turned to her second-in-command, Sam Reyes. "Get me a line to every world leader on Earth. Now." In the days that followed, humanity learned the terrible truth about the galaxy. The Council was not a government of equals. It was a protection racket on a cosmic scale. Younger species paid tribute in resources, technology, and even people. Those who refused were made examples of. The records showed what happened to species that said no. The Karathi system had been completely sterilized 300 years ago. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid where their people lived had been reduced to rubble. The Minthax homeworld had been bombarded until their cities were craters and their populations surrendered. Secretary General Linda Huang called an emergency meeting of world leaders. They argued for days. Some wanted to surrender immediately. The Council's technology was centuries ahead of Earth's. Fighting them would be suicide. Others refused to accept slavery. They would rather die standing than live on their knees. In the end, they decided to send a delegation. Not to surrender, but to learn. To buy time. To find any weakness they could exploit, Ambassador Christopher Grant was chosen to lead the human group. He had spent 30 years as a diplomat, negotiating in the most dangerous places on Earth. His wife Maria was a language expert who insisted on coming with him. "Someone needs to understand how these aliens really think," she said. "Not just their words, but what they mean behind them." Their ship, the Endeavour, left Earth on a cold October morning. The journey to the Council station would take 18 days through space lanes. The aliens had provided. Christopher spent the trip studying everything humanity knew about the Council. Their military had hundreds of thousands of ships. Their technology could do things human scientists thought were impossible. By any logical calculation, fighting them was hopeless. But something bothered him. The Council's power came from fear. Their whole system depended on species believing that resistance was pointless. What would happen if someone truly refused to be afraid? Maria found him late one night, staring out at the stars. "You are thinking too hard," she said. "I can always tell." He smiled weakly. "Just trying to figure out how to tell an empire that controls the galaxy that we do not want to be their slaves. Maybe you just tell them exactly that." The Endeavour arrived at Nexus Prime to find hundreds of alien ships waiting in lines. They were all here to pay their tribute, to show their submission. Christopher watched a massive cargo ship unload containers into the station. The crew moved like people who had given up hope long ago. The station's interior was designed to make visitors feel small and afraid. The corridors were hundreds of meters high. Statues of council leaders lined the walls. Armed guards watched every movement. They were taken to a waiting area outside the main chamber. Other species milled around, some nervous, some simply defeated. A small furry creature approached Maria with curious eyes. "You are the new ones," it said in broken English. "The humans. We are Maluxi. We were new once too. 40 cycles ago. What happened to your people?" Maria asked gently. The creature's ears drooped. "They took our forests. Our beautiful singing forests. Said they needed the wood for their ships. Now, our world is empty. We pay in minerals instead. There is nothing left." Guard shouted something, and the Malaxi hurried away in fear. Christopher and Maria looked at each other. No words were needed. The council chamber was enormous. Thousands of representatives sat in rows, most barely paying attention as another primitive species was brought before them. High Chancellor Vetheran sat on a raised platform in the center, surrounded by his advisors. "Humans of Earth," the Chancellor announced. "You stand before the Galactic Council. We have maintained peace among the stars for 12,000 years. You have been granted the honor of contributing to that peace." A holographic image appeared, showing Earth floating in space. "Your world is small, but acceptable. Your technology is primitive, but shows promise. The Council has determined your tribute requirements." The display changed to show a list. 20% of Earth's yearly mineral production. 10% of all food grown. 500,000 humans every year to work as laborers on Council projects. All scientific research to be shared with and approved by the Council. "These terms cannot be changed," Vetheran continued. "You will accept them as every species before you has accepted them. In return, you receive our protection." The chamber fell silent. Thousands of eyes turned to the two humans standing alone on the floor. Christopher felt his heart pounding. He thought of Earth. He thought of his children and grandchildren. He thought of the Malaxi and their lost forests. He thought of the Korathi, erased from existence for wanting freedom. He thought about what it meant to be human. Maria squeezed his hand once. Ambassador Christopher Grant stepped forward. His voice was calm and clear, and the translation systems carried it to every corner of the chamber. No, the silence that followed was complete. For perhaps the first time in thousands of years, the Galactic Council chamber was utterly still. No one moved. No one spoke. The single word hung in the air like a bomb that had not yet exploded. High Chancellor Vetheran stared at the human as if he could not believe what he had just heard. His scales flickered through colors that had no names in human language. The universe would never be the same. The word echoed through the chamber like thunder. High Chancellor Vetheran leaned forward on his throne, his scales now burning with colors that meant anger. "I do not think I heard you correctly," he said slowly. "Perhaps your translation device is broken." "It is not broken," Christopher replied. "My answer is no. Humanity will not pay your tribute. We will not be your slaves." Whispers spread through the chamber like ripples in water. Representatives who had been bored and half asleep were now watching with wide eyes. Some looked shocked. Others looked confused. And some, Christopher noticed, looked almost hopeful. "You understand what you were saying?" Vesforan's voice had lost its smooth, practiced tone. "You understand what happens to species that defy the Council? I understand that you are threatening to destroy my world if we do not become your property. I understand that you have done it before. And I understand that we would rather die free than live as slaves." The Chancellor's claws scraped against his throne. "You have 30 days. 30 days to change your foolish decision. After that, our fleet will come to Earth. We will take what we are owed. One way or another." Christopher nodded once. "We will be ready." The journey home felt different. The stars outside the ship's windows looked the same, but everything had changed. Maria spent most of the trip studying recordings from the chamber, watching how different species had reacted to humanity's refusal. The Maluxi were not the only ones who seemed interested, she reported. I counted at least 40 species that showed what looked like hope. The Council's control might not be as complete as they want everyone to believe. That only matters if we survive long enough to find out, Christopher said. Earth had not been waiting quietly during their absence. Admiral Morrison had been put in charge of all military forces on the planet. Every factory that could build ships was working day and night. Scientists who had spent their careers competing against each other were now sharing everything they knew. But everyone understood the truth. It would not be anew. The world's leaders met within hours of the Endeavor's return. Christopher told them everything that had happened. He answered questions until his voice was nearly gone. So we face a war we cannot win, said President Carlos Mendez. Against their full force. No, Christopher admitted. But I do not think they will send everything they have. They have too many other species to control. Too many borders to watch. They will send what they think is enough to destroy us, when that force destroys us anyway, demanded Premier Yuki Tanaka. Admiral Morrison spoke up. Then we make them pay such a terrible price that the next species that says no will have better chances. We become the beginning of their end. The room was silent as everyone understood what she meant. Secretary General Huang stood slowly. We have 30 days. Let us use them wisely. What followed was the most intense month in human history. Around the world, old enemies became partners overnight. Countries that had fought wars against each other now shared resources freely. Information flowed without secrets. For perhaps the first time ever, humanity truly acted as one species. Dr. Nathan Brooks was a physicist who had spent 20 years working on engine designs that everyone said were impossible. After 3 nights without sleep, he finally solved a problem that had puzzled him for decades. His breakthrough let Earth's engineers understand how Counsil shields worked. More importantly, it showed them how those shields could be broken. Colonel Patricia Murphy led the team that took apart a crashed Counsil probe. The alien technology was far beyond anything humans had built, but Murphy's team refused to give up. After 2 weeks of work, they understood enough to improve human targeting systems. Now human gunners might actually be able to hit enemy ships moving at incredible speeds in orbit above Earth. The fleet grew larger every day. The carrier Lincoln was joined by her sister ships Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and Delhi. 12 heavy cruisers were finished in record time. 47 destroyers. Hundreds of fighters. It was the biggest military buildup in history, and everyone knew it probably would not be enough. Meanwhile, Maria Grant worked on a different kind of weapon. She and her team of language experts studied every Council communication they could find. They were looking for cracks in the Empire's confidence. They are afraid, she announced during a late-night meeting. Not of us specifically, but of what we represent. We are a species that said no. If we survive, if we even put up a real fight, it could inspire others to do the same. Christopher nodded slowly. The Council's power depends on everyone believing that resistance is pointless. We just proved that someone can stand up and refuse. We said no, Maria corrected. We have not proven anything yet. On the 28th day, the long-range sensors detected the Council fleet entering human space. The numbers made everyone's blood run cold. 47 capital ships, each one bigger than anything humans had ever built. 200 cruisers. Almost 1,000 smaller vessels. Admiral Morrison studied the display with a warrior's eye. They are not taking any chances. They are sending a message, Christopher replied. They want to crush us so completely that no one will ever think about defying them again. Then let us send a message of our own. It's the human fleet gathered in orbit around Earth. 5 carriers, 12 cruisers, 47 destroyers, almost 400 fighters against a force 20 times larger, with technology centuries more advanced. Every ship had a full crew. Thousands of volunteers had been turned away because there were not enough ships for everyone who wanted to fight. Admiral Morrison broadcast her final message from the Lincoln's bridge. Her voice was steady, her eyes clear. Today we fight for our home, for our families, for every human who has ever looked up at the stars and dreamed. We may not win this battle, but we will make them remember us. We will make them fear the day they tried to enslave humanity. And perhaps, just perhaps, we will light a spark that burns across this entire galaxy." She paused, letting her words settle over every ship, every crew member, every human being watching from the planet below. They demanded tribute. We gave them one word instead. No. Today we prove that word means something. The first shots were fired at 8:47 in the morning, Earth time. The Council fleet advanced in perfect formation, a wall of death moving with the precision of an empire that had crushed rebellions for thousands of years. Fleet Commander Varask watched the human defensive line with something close to pity. "Such a waste," he said to his officers. "They have courage, but courage without power is just a slower way to die." He had no idea how wrong he was. The human fleet did not wait to be surrounded. Instead, they exploded into motion. Destroyers and fighters scattered in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully planned. The carriers and cruisers held their position while launching endless waves of missiles and drones. Varask's confident expression changed to confusion. "What are they doing? This matches nothing in our tactical records." The first wave of Council ships entered weapons range and opened fire. Their plasma cannons could melt through almost anything. But the human ships were not standing still. They danced and weaved, hiding behind each other. Presenting the smallest possible targets, the destroyer Valor took the first hit. Her shields flared but held. Captain Marcus Lee kept his course and returned fire with the new weapons Dr. Brooks had helped design. For the first time in the battle, Council ships' shields failed. The enemy cruiser, 3 times the size of the Valar, took the follow-up shots directly to its hull. Enemy vessel is losing air. Across the battle, similar scenes played out. Human ships took punishment. Some died, but they kept fighting. And their weapons were actually hurting the enemy. The battle had begun. And already, everything the Council believed about primitive species was being proven wrong. The battle turned the space around Earth into a storm of fire and metal. Council plasma cannons lit up the darkness. Human missiles streaked toward their targets. Ships on both sides exploded into clouds of debris and frozen bodies. Commander Varask watched his tactical display with growing disbelief. His fleet outnumbered the humans 20-1. His ships were larger, faster, and carried weapons that should have ended this fight in minutes. Instead, his forces were taking real losses. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They are primitives." "Commander, we have lost 14 vessels. 23 more report serious damage. 14 ships. Against a species that had been flying between stars for less than 10 years. It was unthinkable. All ships, focus fire on their carriers. Destroy their ability to launch fighters." The Council fleet began to concentrate its attack on the human capital ships. The carriers Beijing and Delhi both took catastrophic hits within minutes of each other. Delhi broke apart completely, her crew of 3,000 lost in an instant. Beijing managed to get half her people off before her reactor exploded. Admiral Morrison felt each loss like a wound to her own body. But she kept her voice calm, her orders clear. All ships begin Phase 2. Let them think they are winning. The human fleet started to fall back toward Earth. It looked like a retreat, like the beginning of the end. Council ships pushed forward eagerly. Sensing victory, they did not realize they were flying into a trap. Earth's moon had been very busy during the 30-day countdown. Every weapon humanity could build had been placed on its surface or in orbit around it. Mining explosives had been turned into missiles. Scientific satellites had been fitted with guns. The entire moon had become a fortress. "Welcome to our neighborhood," Morrison whispered. The moon opened fire. Thousands of weapons spoke at once. The space between Earth and Luna became a killing ground. Council ships that had been confidently chasing the retreating humans suddenly found themselves caught in crossfire from every direction. Varask's flagship took 3 direct hits before he could react. Alarms screamed throughout his ship. "What is this?" Intelligence said they had no fixed defenses. They did not have any, Commander. 30 days ago, they had nothing. They built all of this since we announced our arrival. The Counsil fleet tried to escape the trap, but the human ships had stopped retreating. They turned and pushed back into the fight, driving enemy vessels deeper into the densest concentration of fire. Lieutenant Commander Rosa Alvarez led Blue Squadron through the chaos. Her fighter was small and fast, almost impossible for the big Counsil guns to track. She dove toward an enemy battle cruiser, her squadron following close behind. Target their sensor arrays. Blind them. 12 human fighters peppered the massive ship with precise shots. 3 fighters died in the attack, but the battlecruiser lost its ability to see. It stumbled blindly, unable to coordinate with the rest of its fleet. The carrier Lincoln became the anchor of the human defense. Her flight decks launched fighters in continuous waves despite taking 17 hits during the battle. 2 of her bays were completely destroyed, but she kept fighting. The battle raged for 6 more hours, when it finally ended. The Counsil fleet had lost 92 ships outright. Another 140 were too damaged to fight. They withdrew to the edge of the solar system, shocked and bleeding. Humanity had paid a terrible price for survival. 31 ships destroyed. Almost 12,000 dead. The carrier Washington drifted as a burned-out wreck. The cruiser Havana had ram. Add a Counsil battleship in the final moments, destroying both vessels. But they were still there. Still fighting? Still free? Admiral Morrison looked at the debris field from the Lincoln's scarred bridge. Her ship had barely survived. But she was still flying, still ready to fight again if needed. Send to all ships, she ordered, her voice rough with exhaustion. Well done. Get some rest. This is not over yet. Commander Vorosk sat in his damaged command chair, reading reports that made no sense. He had brought a fleet that should have been able to destroy 100 primitive worlds. He had lost a quarter of it to one. Signal Nexus Prime, he ordered. Request immediate reinforcements. Tell the High Chancellor that the humans are not what we expected. The news of Earth's survival spread through the galaxy faster than anyone thought possible. The Council tried to hide what had happened. They claimed the battle was just a preliminary fight. They said the real attack would come soon and would crush the humans completely. But the truth escaped their control. On world after world, enslaved populations gathered in secret to whisper about the species that had said no. On dozens of planets, resistance movements that had been quiet for generations began to wake up. The Maluxi passed the story through their traditional songs, sharing it with every member of their scattered people. High Chancellor Vetheron understood the danger immediately. We must destroy them quickly, he told his emergency council. This cannot become an inspiration for others. The fleet we sent should have been enough for 10 such worlds, protested Admiral Thesic. What you are asking for would leave our borders undefended. Our borders will not matter if half our tributary species decide to follow humanity's example. They argued for days. Finally, they agreed to send a second fleet twice the size of the first. It would take 3 months to gather and deploy. 3 months for humanity to prepare. 3 months for the spark of hope to spread. On Earth, people mourned the 12,000 who had died. Their names were carved into a monument that would stand forever. But alongside the grief was a growing understanding that they had done something amazing. We proved it could be done, Christopher Grant said in a speech to the world. Not just for ourselves, but for every species living under the Council's boot. The question now is whether we can survive long enough for that proof to matter. Admiral Morrison threw herself into rebuilding the fleet. New ships were started before the old ones finished burning. Every lesson from the battle was used to make better designs. The next human ships would be faster, stronger, and deadlier. But she knew it would not be enough. They had surprised the Council once. They would not have that advantage again. Maria Grant had a different idea. We need friends, she said during a planning meeting. The Council has made enemies everywhere. We need to find them and bring them together. How? Demanded Secretary General Huang. We can barely defend our own system. We do not need to be strong everywhere. We just need to give people hope. 6 weeks after the battle, a single human ship slipped out of the solar system on a secret course. The scout ship Messenger carried only 12 crew members, including Maria Grant, a carefully chosen team of diplomats. Their mission was simple to explain and almost impossible to complete. Find other species who might stand against the Council. The messenger traveled for 3 weeks before reaching the Galaxy homeworld. What they found broke their hearts. The planet that had once been covered in beautiful singing forests was now stripped bare. The Galaxy who remained lived in crowded cities, working in factories that made goods they would never own. But when Maria played a recording of Christopher's refusal in the council chamber, something changed. Old Galaxy wept openly. Young ones, who had never known the forest, stood straighter than they had in years. "We cannot fight," the elder Tevin said sadly. "They took our strength when they took our trees, but we can help in other ways. We know Council's secrets. We know their supply routes, their codes, their weaknesses, and we know others who would share what they know." The spark was spreading, and the galaxy would never be the same. The messenger traveled from world to world, carrying nothing but hope. Maria Grant and her small team visited species that had suffered under Council rule for centuries. On each world, they found the same mixture of fear and longing. Fear of what the Council would do if they resisted. Longing for the freedom they had lost so long ago. The Kalithi lived on a water world whose oceans had been poisoned by Council mining operations. Their beautiful coral cities were dying. Their children were born sick. When Maria showed them proof that Earth had survived the first attack, their leader made a decision. "We cannot fight openly," he said through the translator, "but we know every underwater sensor in this sector. We can make them go blind at the right moment." The Fennecs were a small species that the Council used as servants on their stations. They were everywhere, invisible, ignored, and they saw everything. "We will watch and listen," their representative promised. "When your ships come, we will tell you where the enemy hides." The Vortani had been conquered so long ago that most had forgotten they were ever free. Their history had been erased, their culture destroyed, but some remembered. In secret places, they kept the old stories alive. "Our ancestors fought the Council," an elderly Vortani told Maria. "We lost, but we never stopped hoping that someday someone would succeed where we failed. Perhaps that someone is you." None of these species could contribute much on their own. The Galaxy had no weapons. The Kalithi could not survive outside their oceans. The Fennecs were too small and weak to fight. The Vortani had nothing left but memories. But together, they formed the beginning of something new. A network of the oppressed. A web of whispered information and small acts of resistance. A galaxy beginning to wake up. Back on Earth. The preparations continued with desperate speed. Dr. Nathan Brooks made another breakthrough, this time with shield technology. Human shields still were not as strong as Council versions, but they recovered faster. Ships could take more hits before going down. Colonel Patricia Murphy trained a new generation of pilots. Her simulators ran scenarios based on data from the first battle. Young aviators learned how to survive against impossible odds. They learned that the Council ships, for all their power, had weaknesses that could be exploited. And in orbit, the fleet grew larger. 6 carriers now instead of 5. 20 cruisers instead of 12. Over 100 destroyers. Almost 1,000 fighters. Still outnumbered by the approaching enemy. But the gap was smaller than before. 2 weeks before the second Council fleet was expected to arrive. The messenger returned home with news that changed everything. "They are not coming at full strength," Maria reported. "Our new friends have been very busy." She explained what had happened. Delays in the Council assembly yards caused by Phoenix workers who accidentally broke important equipment. Confusion in the command structure, thanks to false messages planted by Vortani, who worked in communications. Some ships diverted to deal with unrest on 3 different tributary worlds. Unrest sparked by Galaxy songs about a species that said no. The fleet that is actually coming is about 60% of what they planned. Admiral Morrison studied the new information with amazement. They weakened themselves. "No," Maria said firmly. "We weakened them. Every species that decided to help, every act of sabotage, every delay. This is what happens when an empire built on fear starts to crack." The second battle was still terrible. The Council brought massive force, and they had learned from their first defeat. Human ships died by the dozens. The carrier Delhi II, built to replace the ship lost in the first battle, was destroyed with all hands. The cruiser Havana II met the same fate as her namesake, ramming an enemy battleship in a final act of defiance. But humanity held. And this time, they had help. At a critical moment, when Counsil ships were about to break through the human defensive line, a massive explosion ripped through the enemy flagship. Commander Varask died instantly, killed by a bomb that Fennec's servants had hidden in his command center weeks earlier. Without their commander, Counsil fleet fell into confusion. Human ships pressed the advantage, driving deep into enemy formations. Counsil vessels began to retreat, some fleeing so fast they crashed into each other. When the second battle ended, the Counsil had lost 40% of their ships. Among the dead was their entire command staff. The survivors limped away, broken and defeated. The message echoed across the galaxy. Humanity could not be crushed. High Chancellor. Vetheron received the news in his private chambers. His scales had lost their bright colors. He looked older, weaker, smaller than he had just months ago. "Assemble a third fleet," he ordered. "Whatever it takes. We must destroy them." "Chancellor, there is nothing left to assemble. Our reserves are committed to holding down the unrest spreading through our territory. 3 tributary species have openly refused to pay this cycle. 7 more are demanding renegotiation of terms. Then we will take ships from border defense. If we do that, the outer sectors will be vulnerable. And there are rumors that some species are already talking to each other about coordinated resistance." Vetheron slammed his claws against his throne. How did this happen? They are one small species on one small world. His advisor bowed low. They said no, Chancellor, and they survived. Oh, that was enough. On Earth, celebrations mixed with grief. The second victory had cost even more than the first. Nearly 20,000 human lives lost. Ships that had taken years to build destroyed in seconds. Families torn apart forever. But they had won, against all odds, against an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. They had won. Ambassador Christopher Grant stood at the memorial for the fallen, reading names carved into black stone. So many names. So many people who would never see the future they had fought for. Maria found him there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. "They did not die for nothing," she said softly. "I know. But I wish they could see what is happening. The Malexi sent a message today. Their people are openly singing the old songs again. The Council cannot stop them. And the Calithi have disabled sensors in 3 more systems. The Phoenix are everywhere, watching everything. The Vortani are teaching their children the true history for the first time in generations." Christopher looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "We started something. We said one word. Everyone else did the rest." In the weeks that followed, the network that Maria had helped build grew stronger. Species that had been afraid to even think about resistance began to act. Tribute shipments slowed and then stopped. Council governors on occupied worlds started to disappear. The empire that had seemed unbreakable was coming apart at the seams. The Karathi, whose entire civilization had supposedly been destroyed 3 centuries earlier, revealed that some had survived. They had hidden in deep space, building ships, waiting for a moment that might never come. Now they emerged from hiding, their hatred for the Council burning bright. The singing forests of the Malexi homeworld began to grow again. Seeds that had been preserved through generations of occupation were finally planted. The trees were small and young, but they were alive. And across the galaxy, species that had been enemies or strangers started to work together. They shared information, resources, and hope. They formed a coalition of the willing, with humanity at its heart. The third Council fleet never came. The Empire was too busy trying to hold itself together to worry about one small blue world that had dared to say no. The tide had turned, and there was no going back. 5 years had passed since Christopher Grant stood in the Council chamber and spoke one word that changed everything. In that time, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. High Chancellor Vetheron, was no longer High Chancellor of anything that mattered. The tribute system that had sustained the Council for 12,000 years had collapsed completely. Species that had once bowed in fear now stood tall and free. The great empire was shrinking every day, as world after world broke away to join the growing coalition. The coalition had a simple name: the Free Worlds Alliance. It had started with humanity in the Moloxi, the Calithi, and the Phoenix. Now it included over 200 species. Some had contributed ships and soldiers, others had offered technology or resources, some had given nothing but their courage and their refusal to be slaves. Anymore, and at the heart of it all was that single word: no. Ambassador Christopher Grant returned to Nexus Prime 5 years after his first visit. This time he did not come alone. His ship, the diplomatic cruiser Horizon, was escorted by vessels from 12 different species. The Karathi battleship Vengeance flew on his left. The Moloxi transport Singing Forest flew on his right. Behind them came ships from worlds that had been bitter enemies just decades ago, united against a common oppressor. High Chancellor Vetheron waited in the same chamber where he had demanded humanity's submission. But the room felt different now. Half the seats were empty. The species that had once cheered as new tributaries were announced had either left the Council or fallen silent. "We are prepared to discuss terms," the Chancellor said. The words seemed to cause him physical pain. "The Council recognizes humanity's independence and the independence of your coalition partners." Christopher stood straight and spoke clearly. "That is a start, but we want more than independence. We want the tribute system ended completely. We want the Council to become what it always claimed to be: a forum for equals, not a tool for slavery. You ask too much. We are not asking." The negotiations took 2 years. Old Council species who had grown rich from the tribute system fought every change. Former tributary species demanded justice for centuries of suffering. Humanity and its allies had to find balance between idealism and reality. They pushed for change while trying to prevent the chaos that would hurt everyone. It was difficult work. There were setbacks and failures. Some days, Christopher wondered if peace was even possible. The wounds were too deep. The anger was too fresh. How could species that had suffered so much ever forgive those who had caused their pain? But slowly, step by step, they built something new. The Galactic Assembly replaced the old Council. Every species got one vote, regardless of their size or power. Tribute system was abolished forever. Resources would be shared voluntarily, not taken by force. Species that had been conquered could choose full independence or membership in the new federation as equals. Not everyone was happy. Some old Council species refused to accept their loss of power. They formed their own group and tried to rebuild what they had lost. Some formerly enslaved species wanted revenge more than peace. They could not forgive, could not move on. The galaxy remained messy and complicated. There were still conflicts, still injustices, still problems that seemed impossible to solve. Perfect peace was a dream, not a reality, but there was no more slavery, no more tribute, no more species living in fear that everything they had could be taken away. The galaxy was finally free. Christopher Grant retired from diplomacy at the age of 65. He and Maria returned to Earth and bought a small farm in Montana. They had spent years traveling among the stars, negotiating treaties and building alliances. Now they wanted nothing more than quiet days and peaceful nights. Their grandchildren visited often. The children had grown up knowing their place among the stars. They learned about the Moloxi and the Calithi in school. They played with toys shaped like coalition ships. To them, a galaxy of free and equal species was simply how things were. They did not understand how close it had all come to never happening. Admiral Katie Morrison served as the first commander of the Coalition Defense Force for 15 years. Under her leadership, the combined fleet grew to include ships from over 100 species. She trained officers from worlds that had never had militaries, taught tactics to species that had been forbidden to fight for centuries. When she finally retired, her replacement was a Moloxi named Varen, who had once been a slave in a Council shipyard. The day he took command, the entire fleet fired a salute in Morrison's honor. She watched from the observation deck of the Lincoln, now preserved as a museum ship, and wept. The memorial to the fallen from the Battle of Earth was eventually moved to Nexus Prime. It stood in the plaza outside the new assembly chambers, where representatives from across the galaxy could see it every day. Beneath the list of names was a simple message carved in 100 languages. They said no and changed the galaxy forever. The Maluxi homeworld transformed over the decades. The singing forests grew tall and strong, covering the bare hills and empty plains. The songs of the trees could be heard from orbit now, a symphony of life that the Council had tried to silence forever. Elder Tevin lived to see it all. He was very old when the last sapling from the original forest seeds was planted, surrounded by millions of others. Children who had never known the old forests sang the traditional songs as the tree went into the ground. A young Kalithi approached him afterward, curious about the famous human who had started everything. "What were they like?" the young one asked. "The humans who said no?" Tevin smiled, an expression he had learned from his human friends long ago. "They were afraid," he said. "Just like everyone else who ever faced the Council, they knew they might lose. They knew they might die. But they refused to let fear make their choice for them." "Why? Why did they risk everything?" "Because someone had to be first. Someone had to show the rest of us that saying no was possible. It gave us something the Council had spent 12,000 years trying to destroy." "What was that?" Tevin looked up at the trees swaying in the wind, their leaves making music that had not been heard for generations. "Hope," he said. "They gave us hope. And with hope, we gave ourselves freedom." The young Kalithi thought about this for a long time. Then it asked one more question. "What happened to the human who said no? The ambassador?" Christopher Grant died peacefully on his farm, surrounded by his family. Maria lived a few more years after him. They are buried on Earth, under a simple stone. What does the stone say? Tevin's smile grew wider. It says, "Here lies Christopher and Maria Grant. They said no." And in the singing forest of the Maluxi homeworld, the trees began their evening song. It was a song about courage and hope, about one word that had echoed across the stars. It was a song about the humans who had taught a galaxy to be free.